evening's kinnos. You look at the first kinna, it says, Zachar Hashem mehaya lanu oi, habitu re'es charposenu oi mehaya lanu. Remember, God, what has happened to us. Oh, see and take heed of our shame. Oh, what has become of us. Which is a paraphrase of a pasuk in Lamentations chapter 5, verse 1, which we just read. Echa Parakeh, pasuk Aleph. Oi is a cry. And then you go ahead and you look at the second kinna. And there it says, Eich mipi benu bas hagos kinos rabas, tamur shirim bechedvas. How from the mouths, we only read this on Amotei Shabbos, but how from the mouths of boys and girls, much sadness is now voiced instead of gleeful songs. And there too, of course, the theme is krechzing, crying out to Hashem. In Kinna Gimel, we say, Belel zeh yivkoyun v'leilu banai. Tonight my children weep and wail. And that's the refrain for the third Kinna. Belel zeh yivkoyun v'leilu banai. Tonight my children weep and wail. And then, of course, the fifth Kinna. Adona bechia b'tzion u'misped b'Yerushalayim. How long must Zion cry and Jerusalem mourn? So certainly the kinnos for tonight, the vast majority of them very much have to do with crying. It reminds me of a story that you probably have heard before. I've shared it before, but it's a story that's an important story. The story is about two young men who are Israeli soldiers in 1967. And in 1967, we know, of course, that the Israeli soldiers, Baruch Hashem, they took over the West Bank, I think it is, and they conquered Yerushalayim. They took it back from the Jordanians, not to mention many other parts of Eretz Yisrael as well. And at the Kotel, and you'd read the descriptions of the people who were involved and of the soldiers and the paratroopers who conquered Yerushalayim. And as they made their way through the small alleyways, the tiny little streets found in the old city of Jerusalem. And Rav Goren came with his shofar and with a Sefer Torah, and they came to the wall. And it's something that you can watch on YouTube, and it's highly recommended watching, to remind you of people's connection to Yerushalayim that they did not have access to. Since 1948, they did not have access. And prior to that, obviously, the Arabs had built up almost all the way to the Kotel. It's only after 1967 that they got rid of all the homes that were built up there. And there was garbage piles over there. They got rid of everything, and they built the beautiful plaza that we have access to today, Baruch Hashem. Unfortunately, today, because of Corona, they're only allowing 1,000 people at the Kotel rather than the tens of thousands that normally go on Tisha B'Av, in groups of 20. And if you put yourself into those shoes, everyone knows that famous portrait of those three soldiers standing there at the wall. And there's a story, legendary story, perhaps it's true, perhaps it isn't, but it certainly could be, of two young Israeli boys, soldiers, 18 years old, 19 years old, kids. And one is crying. And of course, they're all crying. And they're crying because they got to the Kotel for the first time. And this is what they'd been hoping for. And this is a dream come true for them. And one friend turns to another friend and he says to him, "Why are you crying? You're secular. You know nothing about Judaism. You climbed Matzada instead of putting on tefillin for your bar mitzvah." And that's not a joke. I was at a bar mitzvah when I was 9 years old, when I lived in Israel for a year, on a secular kibbutz. And that's what they said, that instead of putting on tefillin, we're going to climb Matzada. And that's going to be a celebration of our becoming adults. He said to his friend, he says, "Mati, why are you crying? You're not connected to this. You don't know anything about this." And Mati responded by saying, "Ani boche b'gal shani lo yodea al ma yesh livkot." He says, "I'm crying because I don't know why there's a good reason to cry." So for some of us, Tisha B'Av, it's easy to cry. And for some of us, it's very difficult to cry. And here on this night of crying, it's something that many of us can connect to and many of us have a very hard time connecting to. I was thinking a lot about this today. I was thinking about how in 2014, there were three young boys, Eyal, Gilad, and Shachar, I think were their names. Three young boys who had been kidnapped by Hamas in the Hebron area. Three young boys, one was a high schooler, I think, maybe two of them were high schoolers, one was a Hezri, three young yeshiva boys were kidnapped, and there were 18 days of uncertainty, 18 days of not knowing, 18 days of Klal Yisrael coming together, all of us together. It doesn't matter what kind of hat you wore. You wore a hat, you didn't wear a hat, you wore a kippah, a yarmulke, a kippas yirga, a black hat. It doesn't make any difference. Klal Yisrael had more achdus then than we've seen in a long time. There certainly was more unity at that time. And I don't know if you remember that Tisha B'Av, but it was shortly before Tisha B'Av that we found out that they'd been killed and murdered, and they'd been dead the whole time that we were looking for them. That Tisha B'Av was very easy to cry. It was a very, very easy Tisha B'Av to cry. But sometimes on Tisha B'Av it's much, much more difficult because it's very hard for us to relate to a churban, to a destruction, to a lack of Jerusalem, especially when, most people can just hop on a plane, unfortunately not right now, and go to Jerusalem. Of course, now we don't have the same access that we did. So it's difficult for us, and like I said, some Tisha B'Avs are easier and some are more challenging. Obviously, what Corona has done to the Jewish community in particular, but of course to the world at large, certainly is something to weep and mourn for. On the one hand, on the other hand, it's a time of crisis, and you don't want to get too caught up in it because you have to live your life. When you think about the fact that on my block here on Detroit Street, we have two people, the two most gentle people on the block, Rabbi Morgan and Mr. Plotkin, who both passed away, sadly, from Corona. And, you think about, I mentioned to you perhaps in the past, besides for having life insurance, my wife and I both have life insurance, as everybody our age should. And we also are part of a group called Arevim. Arevim is a group of people of a community life insurance policy, where everybody pays in, and everybody, God forbid, anyone should ever have to benefit. I got an email today saying that there was a last month already, somebody had passed away with 9 children. The goal of the organization is to give $100,000 for each child to help them marry them off, pay for their schooling, their education, their college, whatever it might be. And unfortunately, somebody passed away last month, and with 9 kids, 9 orphans. And I got an email last week saying we're going to charge your credit card $28. And by the way, this is not related to Corona. I got another email today saying today's the second payment. They never charge more than $28. And of course, it's a chesed. You're supporting orphans. You're supporting a widow or a widower. It's a tremendous chesed. It doesn't cost you. There's no monthly payment or anything like that. And it's a tremendous opportunity to be supportive. And God forbid we should ever need to support ourselves. We can benefit as well. And I got an email a while back saying that they had a special appeal or a special circumstances. One of the conditions is if there's a hurricane and people die, so then they don't make these payments. If there is some sort of natural disaster and many people are war, so many people are part of the group, you don't have to make the payments. It's an exception to the policy, if you will. They did not plan for Corona. They did not plan for a plague, the likes of the Spanish flu. And more than 15 people, if I'm not mistaken, who were part of this group passed away. And so they took a poll, how do people want to pay? Because it was a $450 payment to pay for the various children to get the benefit. It certainly has hit our community hard, but even so, in West LA, Baruch Hashem, as far as we know, there's one person at Westwood Village Synagogue who tested positive for Corona, and Baruch Hashem, she's fine. She did okay. But we don't have, thank God, Bli Ayin Hara, nobody in our shul, almost nobody in our community. Although, yes, many people, even here on the screen, your children on the East Coast are unfortunately all too familiar with it. So I don't know if that by itself is enough of a reason to cry tonight. Perhaps it is. Certainly for many families it is. Perhaps we can relate to it, perhaps we can't. But the theme for tonight certainly is crying. And it's a challenge. And perhaps that's enough of a reason to cry. It's because it's hard for us to relate. But in my remarks this evening, I want to share something that I read today that I think is so beautiful and will inspire us as well. Perhaps will give us a bit of a framework and understanding what it is that we're doing here. B'leil zeh yivkayun u'v'yelilu banai. On this night, weep and wail, my children. And we know that Tisha B'Av is designated for crying. 300 years ago or so, when the spies returned, the Meraglim, the spies returned from their mission. We just read about in Parsha Shlach not too long ago. And they delivered a slanderous report against Eretz Yisrael. The Jewish reaction was to cry. The Meraglim, those spies, were motivated by ulterior motives. They instigated unnecessary crying from the Jewish people. And to offset those tears, we must continue to cry. As the Gemara in Tainus tells us, you cried for no reason at all. And now I will designate continuous wailing for generations. And so we cry for the 2 times that the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, was destroyed. We cry for the capture of Beitar, which culminated in the tragic butchering of thousands of Jews, which we make reference to every single time we say Birkat HaMazon in the 4th bracha. We cry for the city of Yerushalayim, which was raised by the wicked Turnus Rufus, and he plowed the city under. And all these things, as the Mishnah tells us in Tainus, happened on Tisha B'Av. But what's really important to remember is that while we cry for these and so many other tragedies, there is purpose and hope in these tears. And crying is how we'll ultimately exit this long, bitter gullus. The 2 words in this kinna, in the 3rd kinna, the term for night is leil, symbolizing the dark exile. And the expression for crying or wailing is yelilu. The same letters, lamed, yud, lamed, seemingly related on an etymological level. And yes, we cry through the night of the exile. And yet, with all of our crying, perhaps concealed in both the word leil, lamed, yud, lamed, and yelilu, is the word li, to me. The letter lamed, says the Bnei Yissaschar, is the tallest of all the letters. And the letter Yud, of course, is the shortest of all the letters. It doesn't even hit the line underneath it. The Lamed represents God, who is exalted, who is high, who is tall, quote unquote. And the Yud represents Bnei Yisrael, the Jewish people. We are the fewest people. What does it say in Devarim chapter 7, verse 7? Ki atem ha'me'at mikol ha'amim. I didn't choose you because of your numbers, because of your multitudes, for you are the fewest of all the peoples. And yet Hashem chose us to be his nation. And Hashem is always with us and always connected to us. That's the Lamed, and that's the Yud of the Leil and of the Yalilu. And that's the Li. In the Haggadah, we say to the wicked child, Bavur zeh aseh Hashem li. Because of this that Hashem acted on my behalf. And again, the word is li, on my behalf. It's as if we're telling our son that even if we cannot understand it, we must still believe that Hashem chose each of us, specifically li, that's me, to be part of his nation. And Hashem derives tremendous nachas from each and every one of us. Hashem loves us, and he hates to see our suffering and our pain. And as we cry, so does the Almighty. So perhaps this word li, and the idea that accompanies this 2-letter word, transforms all of our crying into an anthem of hope. For the crying has purpose and will yield positive results. Every teardrop is cherished, not one is wasted. And this is an incredible theme if you think about it. This is really an amazing, beautiful theme, that the crying of Tisha B'Av, or crying in general, is not just a cry that ends with the past, with the exile, with the pain, but it's a cry for the future of hope as well. After the Yom Kippur War, we know that thousands of soldiers were killed, unfortunately, during the Yom Kippur War. I don't know the exact number, but many, many, many people were killed. You know, in the times of David HaMelech, before somebody went to war, they actually wrote their wife a get, just in case they wouldn't be found. They wrote their wife a divorce document that would only kick in if they didn't come home. And it would kick in retroactively, and that way they would not be naguna. The Yom Kippur War took everybody by surprise. These gittin were not written. And there were thousands of women who sadly and unfortunately were stuck, and they were agunot. They didn't have the option of marrying somebody else because no one knew if their husbands were alive or not. They needed some sort of proof, or certainly some halachic basis to allow them to get married. And they waited and they waited and they waited. And every single day, the agony and the heartache grew. And of course, they were hoping their husbands would come home. But for most of them, it was all for naught. And although, of course, they sensed that their husbands had died in battle, they were not coming home without witnesses to report, to attest to that fact, they would remain agunos, incapable, God forbid, of ever remarrying, essentially imprisoned in their marriages forever. Over 900 women approached Chacham Ovadia Yosef. They pleaded their cases before him. Each woman had her own story to tell. And of course, the Chacham was overwhelmed by each one's desperation and broken heart. And listening to their cries, can you imagine the pain that he saw and experienced, the vicarious pain? Imagine if he's an empathic person, how difficult that was. 900 women, day after day, story after story after story. And listening to their cries every day took its toll on him. He tried to put on a strong front in their presence to give them chizuk, to strengthen them. But after they left, he would lose his composure and he would sob, he would cry. And perhaps you're familiar with Chacham Yosef and how he wore dark glasses. And this is the reason why he had to wear dark glasses. His eyes were very sensitive to light. For you see, the endless stream of tears affected his eyes. And he developed a serious condition, preventing him from seeing anything at all. His physician prescribed drops, but to no avail. Nothing helped. The doctors told him that it was the incessant crying that caused him irreversible damage to his eyes that he would never see again. But he would not give up so easily. He knew that the Chachamim, he knew that the Rofim, the doctors, don't have permission to dictate a death sentence on his eyes. They have permission to try to heal him. But they don't have permission from Hashem to say that he'll never get healed. He went to visit the grave of the Bet Yosef, Yosef Karo. If you've been to Tzvat, and there you see the Beis Yosef, Yosef Karo, who wrote the Shulchan Aruch, the primary halachic guide for Sephardic Jewry, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, buried right there at the top of the cemetery, just when you enter there. And the stone is painted blue. He's right next to the Arizal, and I think the Ramchal is there. As Chacham Ovadia stood there by the grave of the Beit Yosef, where he went to daven to Hashem. He didn't daven, God forbid, to the Beit Yosef. He davened to Hashem in the merit of the Shulchan Aruch. And within his cries were embedded the cries of numerous agunot who desperately wanted to be freed from the shackles of uncertainty. And he begged Hashem, since he had made it his life's mission to fortify, to strengthen the halachic decisions of the Beis Yosef within the Sephardic community, it should serve as a merit for the eyesight of one of his eyes. That was his tefillah. That one of his eyesight should be restored. Apparently he felt that asking for vision in both eyes was too much. And after a long while, he stepped away, and miraculously he could see out of one of his eyes again. And although he was forced to wear dark glasses for the rest of his life, he was no longer completely blind. Rabbi Avram Yosef Shababo was a Rav in Tzfas. He witnessed the miracle. Additionally, Chacham Ovadia's son, Rabbi Moshe Yosef, recalled that although he was only a young boy at the time, he was aware that his father was extremely distraught from the fact he was unable to see and how it hampered his learning. Years later, Professor Zoberman, perhaps you're familiar if you've ever read anything about Israel, certainly before the state started in the first part of the state as well, the doctors were all professors. I don't know why that was, but that's what they used to call them. They used to call the professors. So Professor Zoberman from Hadassah Hospital, who was one of Chacham Ovadia's physicians, confessed, I had nothing to do with the Rav's ability to see. That was all the Almighty's handiwork. The tears that scarred now served as a soothing balm. Crying hurts, but it also heals, because it was his cries at the kever of the Beit Yosef that Hashem responded to. Crying, of course, is about the past, but crying also transforms our present and gives us hope for the future. As we said tonight in Eicha, Shivchi kamayim libeich, nochach Pnei Hashem. I pour out my mind, I pour out my heart to you. Hashem. Opposite Hashem. And perhaps with this understanding of the tears for tonight and for tomorrow, that not only tonight my children weep and wail, but it's Hashivenu Hashem Elecha v'Nashuva Chadesh Shemenu Kekedem, which of course is how we ended Eicha, and how we hope and look to the future, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu renews, if you will, the covenant with us, and rebuilds Yerushalayim in its full glory, in its total glory. I remember last year, Rivki and I went to Ir David, and we were standing right across from East Jerusalem. Remember the name of it? Silwan. It's called Silwan. I was telling Rivki, you see those beautiful homes there? One day those homes will be Jewish. Those beautiful homes there are going to be full of Yidden, living right across the street from the Beis HaMikdash. Right across the street. That's what we hope for with our tears. As we cry out to Hashem, not only to mourn the past, but to hope towards the future as well. And so, I'll share my screen again in case you don't have a Kindle at home, so you can read along. Zechor Adonai mehaya lanu, oy abitu reis charposeinu, oy mehaya lanu. Nachlaseinu nefchal zarim oy bateinu lanicharim, oy mehaya lanu. Yisayim hayinu v'einavayim, Yisayinu mikayinois b'chaydeshav. Oy mehaya lanu. Meimenu bekesef shesinu oy, ki nisucha ma'ayim bazinu. Oy mehaya lanu. Atavarenu nirdafnu oy, ki sinas chinam radafnu. Oy mehaya lanu. Mitzrayim nasanu yadai, v'ashur tzadunu katayod. Oy mehaya lanu. Aviseinu chatu v'yeinam oy, v'anachnu sovlim es aveinam. Oy mehaya lanu. Avadim mashlu lanu oy, ki shiluach avadim bitalnu. Oy mehaya lanu. V'nafsheinu navi lachmeinu oy, ki kafatnu ma'enu. Meyani yadeinu oy mehaya lanu. Oy reinu kisanur nichmaru oy. Yichavaita mikaloi nemiru oy mehaya lanu. Nashim mitziya ininu oy. Ki ishes eshes re'eu timu vizinu. Oy mehaya lanu. Sarim biyadam nislu oy, ki gzei lasa ani chamsu v'gazlu. Oy mehaya lanu. Bachorim techay nasa oy, ki gzei zayna nimtzu. Oy mehaya lanu. Zekenim mishar shavasu oy, ki mishpat yasem amanayim su. Oy mehaya lanu. Shavas nisaysi beinu oy, ki nivtelu oy le regaleinu. Oy mehaya lanu. Naflat eres v'sheinu oy, ki nisraf beis miktashenu. Oy mehaya lanu. Al ze haya davar libeinu oy, ki nutal kavod beis b'havenu. Oy mehaya lanu. Al hartzi oy, sheshamim oy, ki nitan alav shikut mishamim. Oy mehaya lanu. Ata Adonai le'olam teshev, kisachal lidor vador. Lama lanetzach tishkachenu, ta'azenu li'erech yamim. Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva, chadesh shemenu tikadem. Ki yimois ma'asenu kavatzka tzavta alinu mad me'oid. Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva, chadesh yamenu kikadem. We now move on to Tisha B'Av, Kina number 3, which if you have the Koran at home, it's page 56. Belel zeh yivkayun v'lelu b'nai, belel zeh charav eis kachim v'nisrifu armoinai, chol beis Yisrael yagu b'gainai, v'yisku es asrifa asher saraf adonai, belel zeh tiyalel maraniya nichteles, oy beis aviyah b'chayim uvdeles, Yotam Beisov Niskar Hadeles, V'chol Mashivya V'chol Pen Echeles, Yom Shulcha Bo'esh Bo'yeres V'Echeles, V'lel Zev Yeshim Gacheles Yotam Beisadinoi, V'lel Zeh HaGalgal Sibei V'Chayva, V'Shen Gam Sheni Beisi Necharava, V'yoy Le'Ruchama, Bas HaShevava, Ushkesa Meiroish, V'Espid Natzava, V'Shulcha Meisei V'Gam Nashsateva, Kidelasina Meis Asher Haiva, Belazeh, V'Kiamunus Chayus, Kisha Nezava V'Temer Tziyoin, Azavani Adonai, Belazeh Kadarti V'Chashua Meirois, V'Churban Beis Chachi V'Tul Mishmarois, Belazeh Sabuni Afafuni Tzarois, V'Kam Kara Mayed, V'Din Chamesh K'Zeirois, Belazeh B'Chichinam Nikbal Deirois, Yan Ki Oisasi Ba Meis Adonai, Belazeh Eruch B'Y Chamesh Meirois, Gazer Alavois B'Fra Habirois, V'Davku B'Y Tzarois Mitzarois V'Gam Rois, Yom Muchan Haya B'Vkoi Hapigois, V'Mirayeh V'Hirim Koil Zivois, Kum Ki Zeh Hayem Asher Mar Adonai. Belazeh. We're up to Kinna number 4, which is on page 58, if you have the Koran. Shemroin Karel Titon, Mitzoni Avainai, Leretz Acheret Titon Ivanai, Valivati Zak, Nisifar Mainai, V'Temer Tziyoin, Azavan Yadainoi, Chol Yech L'Shivri Leilach, Ahaliva Chashoy Vanyech Gani, Hamsi Shili Shivreich, Ulechayim, Ani Allah Surah Bagadati Bikashi, Vikam Alak Hashim Vana, Bimeri, Olamikzas Ayamim Shilam Tinishi, Siglas Pelaser Achalas Peri, Chemdasi Pashad Vitzilasini, Lachlach Chavarna Sashivi, Valiva, Demi Aliva, Valtivki Kivchi, Shnesai Chachu Valayachu, Shanai, Mishiva Liva, Niche Nekashi, Valuf Nirai, Kala Bagadati, Doi Mialaki, Yagoini Zacharti, Nerdata Tachas Rabais Nerdati, Ine Biarakastim Pamayim Milkarati, Ushviani Yal Bavel, Unity, Ministrafa Shabai Nichbarati, and Shivim Shana Bavel, Nifkarati, Ishashli Sion, Vehal Yosarati, comes like the Pamiatli Amanati. Valiva, like a Khania, Demi Vimata Farati, Nakal says, Naftu Amoinai, Achimel al Dal, Hamel al Dulasam, Hooray, Shemusam, Erech, Galusam, I'll think about me. Hooray, Shiflusam, Yaload, Tisgravina Misichlusam, Rafana Shivram, Nachem Avelusam, Kiatasivram, Atayulasum. Chadesh Yemenu ki kadmoinai ki namecha, Oine Yerushalayim, Adonai. The next kinna, Aron Bechia and Betzia in Misped Yerushalayim. The minhag of our shul, which I instituted, is to sing this song, is to sing this kinna as a song. Very powerful, very, very powerful tune, composed by my friend Ari Goldwag. And we'll sing it a couple of times. Feel free to join in along at home, in the privacy of the room that you're watching. Nobody's listening to you, except for whoever's in the room with you. Sing along at the top of your lungs, assuming you're still muted. Very, very beautiful song. For me, you know, many of you know that I'm sensitive. I'm sensitive in general, but I'm sensitive musically as well. And there'll be times in my life, times during the calendar year, without consciously thinking of something, a song will just pour out from me. And all afternoon I was singing this song without even thinking consciously that we'll be singing it tonight, that it's in the Kinnos. It's just that time of the year. Adana b'chia b'tziyayin u'mispei biru
Shalayim Adana Bechia Be'yetzioi U'misped Biru Shalayim Adana Bechia Be'yetzioi U'misped Biru Shalayim Adana Bechia Ve'yetzioi U'misped Biru Shalayim. How long must Zion cry and Yerushalayim mourn? How long must we cry for Zion, for Yerushalayim? Hoi tirachem, tirachem et Zion, v'sivnecho emois, Yerushalayim. Hoi tirachem, tirachem et Zion, v'sivnecho emois, Yerushalayim. Tirachem, tirachem et Zion, v'sivnecho emois, Yerushalayim. Oy tirachem, tirachem et Zion, v'sivnecho emois, Yerushalayim. Hashem, we beg you, have mercy on Zion, and please rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Have mercy on your people, and bring us back to Yerushalayim. Tirachem, tirachem et Zion, v'sivnecho emois, Yerushalayim. Tirachem, tirachem et Zion, v'sivnecho emois, Yerushalayim. Od b'chatainu charav migdashu v'v'niseinu nizrafeichol. Ve'etz chabura lo kashav nispeid. Adonot v'ashamayim nasu kino. Gam b'chu b'meresh shiftei Yaakov. V'yat mazalois yizludima. Diglei yisharun chafu roisham Adona v'chimach sil. Kadru p'neihem. Hatiru avois v'lei shemael. Tzaku vanim elayana. Keilator nishma b'maroim. Adona v'roya nemon l'hitoizen. Zera kodesh lovshu sakim. Utzva shemayim gam heim tzaku sam kisusam. Chashach hashemesh adonov yirech kodar. V'choy chavim azalai sasu nagam. Taler rishoin b'chav mar nefesh. Apiki vasav l'temach uvalu. Yilala hishmiya shoy adonov amraimim. Ki atavrenu nidafnu kulanu. Ki chav toimim nirechaluk. Ki dam achim nishpach kamayim. La'eret bikesh la'poil sarton. Ki adonu nisalafnu mipnei tzama. V'roim nivas mipnei aryeh. Shki shagasenu layosot la'maroim. Nehegu b'sulois. Begam adonah. V'achorim ki alkeim b'sulah. Kadra paneha. Sibev maiznayim bikesh tchina. Gim nitzchar lanu maves mechayim. Akrav lavash pachad rada. Ki adonah b'cherev v'rav. Shefata nutzreinu. Pagim mayim haridu. Dima kinachal. Ki yois bakeshes. Lo nitan lanu. Tafu mayim al roshenu adonah. Over the Limalech, Kenu Yavesh. Kiravnu Karban Velinis Kabel, Giti Pasak, Seir Chatoy Seinu, Achmanios Bishlu Yaldehen, Umazal Adana Tagim Heli, Mena. Shachachim Shabbos Bli Boy Shevavim, Shadashikach Koltit Kaiseinu, Tikane Litzion Kinogid Elo, Visair Rabasi, Omeyor Nagacha. Tirachim Tzion Kasher Marto, Suchainel Kasher Nivarto. To my Yeshua, Visachish Kula, Visashul Yushalayim, Rachamim Rabim, Kagasul Yad Neviach, Alachin Koyamar, Alinay Shavti Yushalayim, Rachamim Besi, Ibon Bodnim Alinay Tavois. Kavinatal Yushalayim, Nemar, Oit Kerala, Koyamar, Alinay Tavois, Oit if it's Sen, Hore, Mitarai, Mitav, Nicham Alinay, Oit, Yoin of Acharon Mishalayim. Nemaki Nicham Alinay Tvoim, Nicham, Kol Chav Leseha. Yasim Barak, Aiden, Rasakika, Alinay. So say Mizim Chayim Hazeba. Taidaviko Wel Zimra. If you have a siddur, or if you have a Kinos book, this concludes the Kinos, the laments for tonight. But the tefillah for Arvis, for Mariv, continues with V'ata Kadosh. If you have a regular article siddur, it's on page 596 from Matzei Shabbos. V'ata Kadosh Yeshev Tilos Yisrael, V'karazeh al Zev Yamar, Kadosh, 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 Hadinoi Tzavos, Melech Haaretz Kevodai.